We're past the halfway point of Bills training camp, so who have been the 5 most impressive players at Fisher? Plus, with both Poyer and Hyde suffering injuries, how should Sean McDermott look at playing his veterans through the preseason? And what have been our biggest takeaways of the team in Pittsburgh this summer? All that's coming up on this week's edition of the Buffalo Plus Podcast.
Welcome back to the Buffalo Plus Podcast, presented by Buffalo Plus. Dan Fates, Mike Catalana. I am Jenna Cottrell. Before we jump into our podcast, please be sure to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to the Buffalo Plus YouTube channel. We always appreciate it. All right, gentlemen, let's get to it. Another break from camp. The Bills having a day of walkthroughs. That means there's no media availability. We'll start with Mike. 5 players. We're going to talk about it a little bit, but some of the 5 players who you have seen stand out so far through camp.
All right, let's start out with the easy one, the small guy, Isaiah McKenzie. We've talked about him a lot, and it's a strange one in one way. It's almost like he's a new player. It's almost like this guy came to camp and you're like, what does Isaiah McKenzie bring to him? Or he was a draft pick, or he was, even when he first came to Buffalo from Denver, I was like, okay, no one was paying attention. It's almost like he's a different guy. And he's done all the right things. Now, again, he also blows an air horn randomly just to liven everybody up. He's funny. He's all those things still. But Danny's also a heck of a football player and an important guy, and I think he's looked great at camp.
Yeah, Mike, that's a really good point you make about how he seems like a new guy. Like if Isaiah McKenzie was a undrafted player or a guy coming from a team where he didn't play at all, I wouldn't be as excited for the possibilities, because we see those guys all the time at training camp. They have a good play, and you're like,
training camp darling.
Yeah, and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy's great. And in reality, you're like, yeah, he's never going to see the field. Like, it's different because we have seen what Isaiah can do in small sample sizes when his number's been called upon. Much like, as I'm saying this, I understand Gabe Davis. I walked myself right into that. In a small sample size, he has stepped up in moments. So I look at, that's where it feels different about McKenzie, where it's almost like, Jenna, what did he say? He said he feels like he's been running for 5 years.
Yeah. So I asked him, because we got to talk to him after practice on Wednesday, and I said, you've been with the team. This is going to be your 5th season, but what has been the biggest transition with this assuming a larger role? And he's just like, yeah, I've been running for the last couple of years, running and waiting for my opportunity. And he's like, this is now finally my opportunity. And I did a story yesterday for the newscast on 13 Wham, and I ended it by saying, we know Isaiah McKenzie has a huge personality, but this bigger role in the offense might be the only thing he takes seriously, because his tone changed so much, and he was so, you could tell. I mean, he's been in the league for 6 years, but he is finally getting that shot at being not just the gadget guy, not just the returning guy, not just the guy that you can kind of have the fun plays with, the jet sweep king. It's a chance for him to really be impactful in this offense and to be a more full-time guy. And I think he's kind of been poised to take over more of a role. And it's been cool to see, his rapport with Josh and how much that's grown over the last couple of years. And then now with Cole Beasley being gone, this opportunity for him to kind of be a mainstay and one of the main pieces, Mike, in this Bills offense.
Yeah, and it's funny when we talk about all the fun stuff that he does and his connection with Josh Allen. And I think about with Josh, all the stuff Josh Allen does. If he wasn't great, they would be things people would say, great, he does handshakes with all the guys. Maybe he should work on more of his, accuracy.
Yeah, for sure.
Or he's always signing autographs. Maybe he needs the kind of thing that comes about.
That perception changes completely depending on the results.
Who handles being funny, a good, fun teammate, all the little jokes, the stuff about the off, all that kind of stuff, right? But on the field, he takes it dead seriously, is a great teammate, hard worker. Isaiah McKenzie is all those things, but I think he can learn a lot from Josh in this way too, because I think the way Josh looks to him, the way he thinks about him on the field has now changed and advanced. It's almost like it's like it's your kid and your kid's going along and you have fun in high school and all this little stuff. Now he's going away to college and it's like, hey, like this has to be good because I'm trusting you. And so, it's funny as Isaiah's a little older than Josh, but he's trusting him. You're a mainstay now of the offense. I expect this every day, every play. And I think Mckenzie likes that. I think he likes that feeling of Danny's being taken as more than just the gadget guy.
Well, he's contributing, not to jump in, Dan, but I think he wants to be in Buffalo. He said that even in his press conference, like when those years where he was like, all right, am I coming back? Am I not? He said he's always wanted to be a part of this Bills team because he believes in how special the group is. And speaking of just how special, and like him and Taryn Johnson at practice, Isaiah McKenzie is constantly talking, but you can tell how much Taryn Johnson and Isaiah McKenzie are just discussing like, okay, I did this here. What should I do there? Just like the other side of the ball. And I think that is something that is also a huge benefit for this team is just how good both sides of the ball are. There's really an opportunity for each side to get better. And look, I get it's training camp and all of those things. That is huge though, because you're playing against, these cornerbacks are playing against the actual Stephon Diggs, the Gabe Davises, and you can schematically kind of understand what goes into everything.
It's also the fact of, it's the old cliche of like, there's only one ball. And for the last 2 years, the Bills offense has been so dynamic that unless somebody has been injured, Mckenzie's his number really hasn't been called. So there is that sense of I've waited my turn to get my call. And then you have to back it up though. Like we see guys get chances all the time and then it doesn't amount to anything. So the offense seems like there is much more, like you have to also call plays. Like I think that 4 guys, I think sometimes people think that like the play is called and then Josh gets to decide where it goes. Like there's a first read, a second read, and a third read, or so on and so forth. And a lot of times it just so happens that Diggs would be the first read or so on and so forth. So The fact is that so far at training camp, like Isaiah has been a first read on a lot of Josh Allen's passes. Look, he has done such a great job of expanding his repertoire of passes. He used to be this guy that it was all deep throws. And then he wasn't great at deep throws, but he improved so much on those short and middle throws. And I think Isaiah has really embraced that chance of getting those opportunities.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Dan, is there another guy that has stood out to you or what?
Ed Oliver's a monster. And it's called the Von Miller effect, but I thought Ed was great when he talked about how the fact is Mitch Morse said how tough it is when they're lined up on the same side. And Ed goes, I like it even better when we're on different sides because then you really got to pick who you're going to help with. He said he's having the most fun he's ever had at training camp. He says that this defensive line, like Ed's a guy that has fun all the time. So for him to say this is the most fun he's having is an encouraging sign. Look, the Bills offensive line right now at training camp is a disaster. It is hard at times to really get a judge of where the offense is at because of the amount of injuries they're having, the guys that they're cycling in front of Josh Allen, Bobby Hart, Quessenberry, Van Roten, there are so many guys that I go, well, they're never going to see the field like week 1 or week 2 if things are right. So like not to freak out, but it has been a struggle for the offensive line, and Ed Oliver has been just in the backfield so much it's been comical.
Yeah, I see what you're saying because there has been a lot of movement on the offensive line. Even Spencer Brown, we kind of saw him back to doing more drills, but not really seeing him involved as much. Obviously, Deion Dawkins was not around for personal reasons. He was back to practice. But I do feel like, and I will go back to this, last year, Leslie Frazier said that he expected Ed to have kind of a breakout season. And we saw a presence from Ed Oliver. I feel like now with the coupling of Von Miller and I feel like Ed feels different. I feel like his demeanor is different. And maybe that's just my own opinion, but he just seems so comfortable. And one of the things that always struck me was when he was drafted, Mike and I were down there, we were at the draft, and he said, first and foremost, like, I'm not a rah team guy. And I remember thinking in my head, curious how that will kind of fit in with Sean McDermott and this Bills team, because it's kind of like a rah team type of atmosphere. And I feel like Ed has been able to be himself, and the team has embraced him for that. And with that and the play on the field, I just look at this season, Mike, for Ed, and I think there's the potential for not just Bills fans to know Ed Oliver's name, but for the reach beyond that and how impactful he could be.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. He should be that guy.
Yeah.
This is when he should be all those things they were hoping for when they drafted him, and he's trending in that direction. We always want to see guys contribute as a rookie, get better, all those things. I think Ed has been on a pretty steady transition to being good. Has he had some bumps? Absolutely. You guys remember when he basically got sat down, a couple years ago, and he wasn't doing those things. And he's evolved from that. And I think he's embraced who he is. And he's going to get paid a lot of money, a lot of money showing this. And having, it's great. He's got a Hall of Famer and Von Miller next to him, or, on the D line with him. But I think he's going to want to show up in that way too. And we always say this, stats aren't his thing. Don't worry about that. He'll get there. He'll get enough plays made. But I think it's something to see a guy like that where he is look so good in camp and sort of toy with that offensive line that Dan was talking about.
I think sometimes it gets blown out of proportion, and sometimes for some players, and I'll get to it in a second, it really matters. And that is having, I don't want to call it a friend or a mentor or something along those lines, but I remember when Ed Oliver talked about Jordan Phillips back in 2019, when Jordan had his big season, he was like, that's my big brother. Like, that's the guy that pushes me. That's the guy that I take so much advice from. And we saw at times, like you said, Mike, because 2019, he had the big game on Thanksgiving. He's had these moments where you're like, this guy can be an absolute game wrecker. And in today's NFL, they always talk about pressure up the middle. Quarterbacks hate pressure up the middle. Like, Ed Oliver can provide that. And to see Jordan Phillips back, and it maybe that was just reinvigorates him, and along with Von Miller, don't get me wrong, but him and Jordan seem to have this bigger bond than just another teammate. So I wonder how much that plays into Ed having more fun, Ed feeling more confident, along with Von Miller pretty much saying, Ed's great, I can't wait to play with him. That's a future Hall of Famer.
The personalities on the defensive line are just, we should do a story. Like, it's just, there's huge personalities.
Yes. Yeah.
Always something, always a lot of talking to. All right, Mike, is there another guy that's kind of caught your eye this camp? Yeah.
Mitch Morse.
Oh, interesting.
He is in the center of Dan called it a disaster. I would hold back on disaster for one reason, because it's still the first week in August. Now, that being said, they got to get these guys on the field. They want to make sure these guys are ready. I think the one plus they have is these backups. We talked to Greg Mance, the backup center. He's been in the league 7 years. Like, they went out and got guys, Quesenberry. They got guys that have played. Mm-hmm. So the backups on this team, it's almost like they're saying, okay, we're not going to play that game where there's some kid who's never been on the field. They do have backups that have played in the league before. I know who they want on the field. We all know that, and they need to get them. But I just look at Mitch, and you guys know, fans know too. You hear the way Mitch talks? It's like calm, a voice of reason. Even when he was talking about,
he actually?
We went to high school together, Mitch and I.
Because that's, it feels like that.
He does feel like it.
I think like he's 30. He's 29 or 30.
I know.
He's 30.
You feel like he's so, like, I can see him. I've probably used this before. You guys may have seen it on Nick at Night. Like, I can see him with the family at home going, okay, kids, we're going to have a family meeting here. That's what Greg Brady or Michael Brady used to do. Oh, do they? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, calmly calling them in and saying, kids, you have chores to do. You got to help your mom. Like, that's what I see, Mitch, when he's sitting there talking about the fight and he's like, guys, it's, they've been at camp.
We're not sleeping well.
We're not sleeping well. It's
That
getting
was
hot.
funny.
It's like, come on. Josh Allen's throwing punches. I mean, but Mitch took it like in stride. And it's almost like he's in the middle and there's a little bit of chaos around him on a daily basis. Now, again, this is not the same as in the season when the chaos causes Josh Allen to get hit. But I just like the way he's really evolved from that weird experience a year plus ago when all of a sudden he wasn't playing and who knew what was going on to now where it's like, oh yeah, they got Mitch in the middle and he's ready to go. So he's impressed me top to bottom.
He kind of feels like the eye in the middle of the storm right now.
No doubt.
Yeah.
He's that anchor of like, okay, he's the veteran in the room. He understands his role. He understands what's going on. And like you said, I agree with, I don't think it's a disaster because of where we're at in the season, but I definitely think it's something to keep your eye on.
Oh, it's not great.
No, I mean, it's
that.
definitely Bobby Hart is working with the ones like it's not great. It's not great.
And to finish one last point on Mitch Morse, Jenna, you talked about how he feels like he's, like went to school with Mike. I remember when he signed and he was the highest paid center in the league and he celebrated by going on a shopping spree to Old Navy.
Oh my god!
So
they don't have his size at Old Navy, do they?
They don't. If that doesn't summarize Mitch Morse enough, I don't know what does.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Do you realize how much you can buy at Old Navy
with his
I
money?
I love Old Navy, but I also don't make millions of dollars.
You don't
yet. Okay. All right, Daniel. Another guy.
Well, Jenna, do you got a player?
Yeah.
You skipped yourself.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I had Gabe Davis. Actually, this works out well. Dan did a great story on Gabe. I just combined their names. And to me, when no one is saying a bad thing about you, there's pressure that comes with that, obviously. But I just see some of the catches he makes in the red zone work, 11 on 11 stuff, and we've seen him make big plays. And again, he's a guy that's going to have a more expanded role this upcoming season. I look at him and I think there's real potential there. And I mean, Sean McDermott talked about it with Isaiah McKenzie. Now you're going to have guys game planning for you. It's a different type of, it's a different feel because people know who you are. They know what to expect. They know your tendencies. They know to look out for you. But I just see Gabe and I see what the skills he has and the poise that he has, even going into just his third year in the NFL. And I think that could be just a huge asset, Dan, for this Bills team.
Yeah, I've liked what I've seen out of him. I think he's had probably his rookie year training camp. He really popped too. I think he's looked strong here. I haven't seen any. I mean, the offense in general hasn't had a ton of wow plays in 11 on 11, in my opinion. I just haven't seen, and if they have been, it's been Isaiah McKenzie catching a red zone that I jogs my memory. Dawson Knox caught a touchdown pass. Like, I haven't seen a ton of wow plays out of Gabe in 11 on 11, but the way that he catches the ball just looks like a guy that, he has a jugs machine at his house down in Florida. Like he just looks like a guy that is comfortable with this opportunity. And as we said before, I've always respected and I always really appreciated how he was open and honest last year after he'd have these great games and he would talk on Thursdays with the media that he'd be like, yeah, I want to play more. Like he wasn't shy about that. And I thought that was very mature the way he went about it. He wasn't whining. He wasn't complaining, but he was being honest of, yeah, I want to play more. Like, duh. But like, I know that I'm not being asked to right now. And that's something I just have to enjoy, have to embrace. And he talked about with me and he said that, patience is huge in this league. And I think he's learned that, it's paying off right now.
Michael, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think what we're focusing on here, I was thinking of it as we were talking about these players, focusing on players that there is a reason to look at a guy. We're talking about Gabe Davis, who had 200 yards and 4 touchdowns the last time we saw him on the field. But what we're all talking about is he going to take that step? Not to do that every week, but is he going to take that step to be a weekly big contributor like Isaiah? I look at a guy like Mitch, middle of the storm, like you talk about. Then we look at a guy like Ed Oliver, who's now got the help around him, how he can really progress. And it takes me to another guy who I'm going to compare a little bit more to Mitch Morse in this way, which will be the first time these two players have ever been compared. And we already talked about him, and say Taryn Johnson. Because I'm looking at what's going on in that secondary, and you got both safeties banged up. You got a rookie on one side. You got a 7th-round pick, Dane Jackson. You've got Saran Neal and other players trying to find their way, and Trey White running on the sidelines. And there's Taryn Johnson out there every day, and it's almost like we take him for granted.
I think
the team doesn't, but we sometimes do, because we think corners. Everybody thinks, oh, the outside. And the Bills are in great shape in the slot, because that guy comes to play all the time. And he went through his own issues, playing time, and found his way and has made some huge plays for them. But again, right now, when he takes the field, the next practice, no Poyer, no Hyde, no Trey, you know what I mean? Like, okay, go out there and play. And I think he's just shown why he is so good.
I feel like early on it was like, oh, Taryn Johnson on the field, it's a liability, all this stuff. He had his injuries that he went
his injuries
through.
Was the big thing.
Had the injuries that he went through. And you're right. I think it's quietly something that maybe fans are like, oh yeah, well, Taryn Johnson, it's fine. Like, yeah, he's there.
Yeah, Taryn's always one of the guys that, like I said, I talked about at training camp, was that, and I've said it before, that I think, Tremaine Edmonds is the 7th most important player on the Bills defense. And one of the guys that I would always have ahead of him would be Taryn Johnson. What he does for this defense, who plays a lot in the nickel package, he has just been massive for them. And Mike, to your point too, I know you kind of, you said it again, like, oh, and Dane Jackson, like, he's looked solid in camp so far. Like, again, the defense has won 6 out of the 7 days, 5 out of the 7 days that, that they've had practices. And I feel like, especially at training camp, if you're not noticing a corner, that's a good thing. Like he isn't sticking out like a sore thumb, like, wow, who just got beat? Because nobody's really been beating anybody. We can talk about Kaiir Elam. We've talked about him on podcasts. We've talked about him on, post-practice recaps, that, he's looks comfortable. I haven't noticed Dane look out of place either.
I agree.
And he's going up against the other guy that Kaiir isn't going up against. So we're all sitting here going, oh, Kaiir and Diggs is a great battle, or Kaiir and Davis. It's like, you got Dane and Davis on the other side too. Like, we're so focused on Kaiir that we're not noticing Dane, and Dane's quietly doing a satisfactory job of being that guy right now while Trey White's out.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And we're mentioning these other guys. I'm hoping people in their comments are mentioning other players. These are other guys that we've talked about. Dane's one of them. But again, we're going to see maybe even a little bit more of him going forward on where he is. And then these other guys, you mentioned Kaiir Elam, of course. And then you've got Khalil Shakir, who's shown real flashes, had a couple of rough moments, but he's looked really good. Even a guy like Christian Benford all of a sudden showed up a little bit, and people, the Villanova kid. Again, these are flashes. And I'm not going too far on these players, because this is practice, and as the coaches say, not real football. The other guys we've talked about have all played real football. They've played in real games, and now we're talking about another level. So the rookies, some of it is good and impressive. But the guys even like a Dane Jackson, he certainly could have been in the mix. But again, it's at what level that we think he's going to end up being. Because right now, I know he's a starter, so he better be ready. Better be ready for the Rams, because we'll see where they are when we get there.
Okay. Dan, anyone else? Mike, anyone else?
The last one I had, I didn't love the pick when they took him this year. I didn't really see the production at Georgia to really get me excited about him. But James Cook moves different than the other Bills running backs. And I think I've mentioned this before. He, is smoother than most. Almost smooth, like wide receiver smooth. Like all the things that he was talking about how I can be in the passing game and I can take tops off of defenses. Like it looks different. There has been nothing I will never get excited about a run in training camp, but it's the way that Cook moves gives me some thought that there could be some explosive plays coming out of the backfield, whether that's a swing pass. We've talked about yards after catch. Cook could be that slippery, smooth, slithery guy out of the backfield to take a swing pass and go 15 yards instead of 4. Like, whereas, we always test it, Sean McDermott loved that Devin Singletary caught a ball and then, attacked a corner and pushed him back 5 yards. It's like, yeah, because Devin Singletary was supposed to be that guy that could make you miss in a phone booth. Now we're complimenting Devin Singletary for putting his head down and taking on a corner. It's like, I think Cook can make guys miss. Yeah. I think in the open field. So this is
no. It's just interesting because I didn't think Dan cared about Yak.
I don't think the Bills care about Yak.
I'm kidding.
I think it could help Josh a little bit. And slippery, smooth, and slithery is the way Deion Dawkins described Von Miller.
Yes.
So I forgot about that.
I think he said slithery. He was coming up with some real good ones there.
And Stephon Diggs doesn't throw around compliments very often, but he was very complimentary of James Cook. He has played with Delvin and said he sees some similarities.
Yeah.
And again, Delvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, pure runners, just different the way they run than Moss or Singletary. That's not breaking news, but I can see some of that comfort level with Cook. I was talking to Matt Beauvais about it, and it was just the sense of, it looks like, how they say some running backs put players on skates, like they kind of wobbly. James Cook looks like he's on skates. Like the way that he turns and slides and kind of goes around corners is very smooth. It's different than I've seen. Yeah.
It feels almost, I don't want to say effortless, but it feels very natural.
Yeah.
I would say.
And by the way, before anybody thinks we don't, we're not mentioning Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen and Von Miller. Yeah. I think you guys all assume that. Like, if there was a problem with any of those guys, I think we'd let you know. I love the intensity they all bring when they're playing. So they're not in our list of 5 guys because they're the kind of guys you just almost assume and you just move to the next one.
Yeah, they already stand out.
Yeah.
Well, there is something because there's been injuries at camp. There's a scary situation with Micah Hyde. It seems like he's doing a lot better. He was dealing with soreness. Jordan Poyer injuring his left elbow. He looks to be out for a couple weeks. What does Sean McDermott, Mike, do with managing the veterans on the field, knowing where we're at in the preseason, what's ahead, and then also making sure that there's that balance of guys feeling ready?
It's easy to almost say, you know what? Let's take about 10 guys, put them on a plane, ship them out to LA, and tell us to meet us at the stadium in September.
Yep.
Right? There's almost a feeling you can do that. I will say this. We talk about not playing in the preseason games because I really don't care about the preseason games because you don't control what goes on in the preseason games. But there was no control of both Hyde and Poyer. They're playing football. This is what they do. And they both got hurt. Hitting an elbow on a helmet is sort of a freak thing. Micah just playing football is what he does, and he ends up getting hurt. But I would say this. I think he already had a plan on the preseason. I say very limited. Last year, I didn't want to see Josh Allen on the field. He went out. He tore up the
Green
Packers
Bay.
on that game. And then they went out and played lousy on offense against the Steelers opening day. So I don't want to hear that they need that. They need to get themselves ready. Most importantly, they need to be healthy. So I think if I'm Sean McDermott, I'm sorry, they're going to practice and they're going to play on the practice field. Now, look, Poyer's going to be out a few weeks, and that's going to, who knows what that does with the contract negotiations. But I would be, if the guy's supposed to be out 5 days, to me, he's out 8 or 10. Those guys.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, I will say, Poyer and Hyde have maybe the 2 young corners starting with them. We don't know where Trey's going to be. You
need to get,
you need a little bit of that time before you walk out on the field and take on that Rams offense. But that being said, it's a long season. It's about health. It's about a bit of survival. And I'd err on the side of less is more when it comes to my veteran players.
I will
And I
say
think-
when there's those injuries, you're
Yeah.
like just end practice. Like I feel like I'm like let's just wrap it up. Let's just go.
Hey,
I
Jenna,
think-
you were there when Poyer walked off the field.
It felt really scary. It felt very, very scary. And I know in other camps, other teams, they've had detrimental.
Oh, somebody clipped the tape right there.
No, I'm not.
Comments are gonna
I'm
love that
also,
one.
I'm not high. I just can't speak. Detrimental injuries.
Yeah.
So it's like when those moments happen, they feel scary, especially when they're guys like veterans that are main huge contributing. Oh, no, okay, Dan, just talk.
Yeah, I'll take it from here, Jenna. Thanks. And it's because Sean, I think McDermott comes from that era of this like old school when they practice 3 times a day in pads and all of these things. I think he likes that. I think he does. He is that grit and toughness guy. But I think he has grown
Adapted
into this, and we talked about it. Like practices aren't at 8:00. Like they're at 9:45. Like that's not because Sean wants to sleep in. Sean's up at 5. Like he's running and doing all of his things early. So like he listens to his players. I think that whether to Mitch Morse's point, like we're not sleeping well. Von Miller has complained about toilet paper. Like I think he will. Like you do have to tackle and be physical, and that's where Jordan Poyer got injured on a goal line play. But I think Sean McDermott is going to start easing his foot off the gas more and more as we get closer to the season because there's just no point.
I feel like McDermott has adapted well.
I agree.
In trying to, you're right. He has the background of hard-nosed, grinded out football, like all those things. But the realization of things have changed. I mean, even Mike, the Guardian caps, all those things are a little different. And it's about, what is load management in the preseason. And I know we talk about it in the NBA, but now it's kind of like, okay, yeah, because the risk reward is real.
Yeah. Well, because the difference between the NBA and the NFL is, once there's games, you're playing and they all want to play. Like you got to fight to keep a guy off the field. We're talking about practice. Here. So to dance, there's something between it doesn't matter and it's you have to be out for every snap. Yeah. And I think they've done a good look. Nobody's done a better job in total than the Bills in managing players, managing injuries, all those things. Heck, we were talking to O.J. Howard yesterday, and he was talking about how impressed he is with the Bills' facilities. And what did he say, Jenna? Now, he's not doing rehab, he's doing prehab, and he's never done that in his career. All these things play into it, where they're doing everything they can to be ready. But it is to get ready for September, get ready to play. Veteran guys know what they're supposed to do on the field. I think they can get by with less. But it is scary when you see those guys go off the field, and you want them to be ready to play. Once the games start, the games start. You don't want to see it happen in the preseason. But I think they've done a pretty good job. Let's see where they go when the preseason games start.
I mean, in hindsight, it's always 2022. I feel like you have to, if someone gets injured because of the result of you practicing hard, you know what I mean? It's tough, but I feel like McDermott and the staff try to manage as much as possible. And even by today, Bills were supposed to have practice on Wednesday. Today's Wednesday. They had decided to not have media availability and have a walkthrough, things of those nature.
It's been hot. It's been really hot and muggy
honestly,
and humid at camp. I think that goes into it too. I think it's been a couple hot days in a row.
Yeah.
I think that was another reason of McDermott. They practiced pads 3 straight days. Yeah. Saturday, Monday, Tuesday. So
3
I think
straight
that was
practices. Yeah.
3 straight practices.
And you know what? It used to be almost like this level of toughness and what you can do and all, and that was the game. These guys are plenty tough enough, and they will be ready. And that's what the other teams are doing too. It's not like every other team is in pads,
2 a day,
right, and doing this. It's not the way the game is played anymore. Because what do we want? We want to see when they're ready for the regular season, and the players have shown they can be ready. Yeah. They need some, though. They can't just walk out. You can't just walk out on the field and play football. You need some preparation. You got to get ready. I think they'll be smart, but it's been a little bit of anxiety.
Yeah. All right, Dan, some of your biggest takeaways from the first couple weeks of training camp.
Well, like I said, I was asked, I remember after like the first at a radio hit somewhere, and they said, how concerned are you about the Bills offensive line? And I was like, I'm not concerned. My meter's moving closer to concerned. And I know it's this, but it's not only that. I know it's the first week, like Mike said, but we were talking about it, how like you want 5 guys together to gel, and there's not 5 guys gelling and right now. And so that is concerned, and you don't get these reps back. And, the fact that Roger Saffold, has bruised ribs from a car accident, and we haven't seen Ryan Bates out there, and, Spencer Brown, we still don't know what his injury was. Like
he had back surgery too, right?
Okay. But nobody we believe it was minor back surgery, but like nobody else has really talked about. Like I was asking other reporters, like, if I missed what his injury is and what is keeping him out. So there is that. Let's get some guys together, because missing one guy is all right. You're like, all right, the other 4 are going to gel. Like Dion and Mitch are the only guys that are hopefully blocking for Josh Allen this year, and not Case Keenum in backup.
Yeah. Well, look, you're right. It's a concern. It's pretty good to have the center and the left tackle. I think Spencer Brown looks pretty good. I think he'll be all right. He'll be back in. Roger Saffold is a huge man.
Massive human being.
Yeah.
But hopefully he's ready to go. I think they'll get the offense. I do think they'll get the offensive line together. It used to concern me, like they need 3 preseason games and they need all. They'll adjust. I think they'll adjust in that, because again, a lot of these backup guys have played in the league, and they have some versatile players that can play multiple positions. I'm holding off on panic till we get a little farther along. Jenna, what I would say for my take, and I didn't think I would say this, but I think it's Matt Ariza's job to lose. I think he's going to be the punter. And I think he's shown, look, we don't see, we could go on the other side and just stand there and watch the punters while we're not watching practice. But in the moments I've seen them on the field, I think he's adapted to what they want. They want the ball higher. They're not worried about him setting some record of the 90-yard punt. That's a cool thing to see, and everybody gets excited. You got to be smart with the way you kick the ball. And we'll see how far he's progressed as a holder, even though, we've been told that punting is still the advantage as a punter, right? You still got to kick the ball. That's the job. I think he's looked pretty good. I'm not saying it's a done deal, and I'm not saying the preseason isn't going to be very important to him. I think he looks the part, and I think he's adjusted his game, and I think they're going to be happy with that leg and his ability to do what they're asking him to do. So let's see how it plays out.
Yeah. My takeaway is just that the preseason's too long. And that I know they have now 3 preseason games, but it's silly and I hate it.
We haven't even reached preseason.
I know, but I'm saying
it's 3, and I think soon it'll be to 2. I think the next step is for it to take it to 2.
Silly.
And I think they should be, honestly, I think that the league should say it's for certain amount of players. They're the ones who play. They play the majority of the game. You take the poor season ticket holders out of the mix. Don't make them pay full price for those tickets. Do something for charity. Get some people to the games that don't get to go. I think it's an arrogant, greedy thing for the owners to force that. And then make the games a little bit of like a internal reality show of guys making the team. And you got these good stories.
Action.
Yeah, kind of that for the preseason. No Josh Allen on the field. We're not pretending that's the case, that it should be that. They don't need to play in those games. Do it that way. But Raj hasn't called me on this yet, but that's what I would do.
Honestly, Michael, love the enthusiasm.
That's it.
All right. Well, we'll have plenty more coverage coming up on Buffalo Plus. Again, we'll have our daily recaps of what goes on in practice, as well as insight from the players, our analysis, all of those things, some stories. Dan and Mike are both working on some fun stuff as well. Very entertaining.
And I wanted to mention, too, we have our audio podcast also. Anywhere you get podcasts, just look for Buffalo Plus. There we are. And during the season, that will be a morning after the game. Hopefully you subscribe, be our take, driving to work, whatever it is, or at work, just put the headphones in. Right, the morning after every game. So the Friday after the first game, Mondays after Sunday games, that'll be the case. Buffalo Plus audio podcast.
Yeah. And just throw in the headphones like I
Yeah.
do when Mike talks too much. Just slowly put in the headphones.
I'll say some inside baseball here behind the podcast. If I've been looking off the camera the entire podcast, anybody that's watching, Braves and Phillies have an afternoon game. So I've been inside baseball is literally inside baseball. That's what I've been watching behind me.
Mike has been texting a lot too. So
Yeah, I was checking a couple of things. I wanted to see what if the Bills made any other announcements.
Oh,
Okay.
They did not.
They did not. They did not.
Breaking news, they did not. All right. Well, thank you for joining us here on Buffalo Plus. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We always appreciate it. And like Mike said, check out our audio-only podcasts. You can find that wherever you listen to your podcasts. Again, the name is Buffalo Plus. We're also on Twitter as well as Instagram. We're always updating. I'll do like a video recap of what happened at practice for Reels too. So be sure to check that out. Thank you again. We'll catch you next time here on Buffalo Plus.